The last rays of sunlight were slipping behind the mountains when Nymphadora Tonks appeared at the edge of Hogsmeade Village, her boots finding purchase on the familiar cobblestones with a soft scuff that echoed in the unusual quiet. Her hair, currently a vibrant bubblegum pink that would have made her mother sigh with fond exasperation, caught the fading light like spun sugar. She paused there, at the boundary between the wild hills and civilization, and let herself simply breathe. The air tasted different tonight, metallic, perhaps, charged with something that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with what was coming. Tonks had been an aura long enough to recognize the particular quality of atmosphere that preceded violence, the way the world seemed to hold itself tense, waiting for the first crack of thunder that would release the storm. But for now, for this moment, Hogsmeade lay quiet in the May evening, and she was alone with her thoughts. Her hair flickered to lavender as she started walking, a tell she'd never quite managed to control despite years of metamorph maker's training. Colors betrayed her when emotions ran high, and tonight her emotions were a tangled skein she couldn't begin to unravel. Pink for the bravado she needed to wear like armor. Lavender for the bone-deep weariness that came from months of running, fighting, hiding. Blue would come later, she knew. Blue always came when she thought too hard about what she was walking toward. The cobblestones beneath her feet were worn smooth by centuries of witches and wizards making this same journey. Students eager for honeydew sweets, adults seeking the warmth of the three broomsticks, travelers heading to or from the castle that loomed above them all. How many of those travelers had walked these stones knowing it might be their last time? How many had carried the weight she carried now, heavy as lead in her chest? Tonks passed the first shops, their windows dark and shuttered. Honeydukes looked abandoned, its usually cheerful displays of fizzing whizbees and chocolate frogs absent from the windows. A handwritten sign hung crookedly on the door, closed until further notice. The Flumes had left weeks ago, she'd heard, taken their family and fled to relatives in Cornwall, as far from the fighting as they could manage. She didn't blame them. Not everyone was meant to stand and fight. Not everyone should have to. Her reflection caught in the dark glass as she passed, a young woman with a heart-shaped face and eyes too old for 25. Her hair had settled into a deep rose color, somewhere between defiance and melancholy. She looked away. The three broomsticks stood ahead, and despite everything, Tonks felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. How many evenings had she spent there during her Hogwarts years? 7th year especially, when Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws would crowd around tables near the fire, arguing about transfiguration theory or the latest Quidditch scores. Butterbeer foam on upper lips and laughter echoing off the low-beamed ceiling. Madame Rosmerta had served them all with patient amusement, occasionally reminding them that some of her other patrons were trying to have quiet conversations. Tonks had always tipped well, using the pocket money her father slipped her with a wink when her mother wasn't looking. Ted Tonks had understood the value of a warm pub and good company. The memory of her father sent a sharp pang through her chest, and her hair flickered dark purple for just a moment before she wrestled it back to pink. Ted Tonks, muggle-born wizard with a ready smile and terrible jokes, who'd been on the run for months now because he'd been born to the wrong parents, because prejudice and fear had been allowed to fester until they'd poisoned everything. That was what they were fighting. That was what made tonight necessary. The Three Broomsticks was shuttered too, but not abandoned. Tonks could see a faint light glowing between the cracks in the boards over the windows. Rosmerta was still here then, probably brewing healing draughts, preparing for casualties, doing what she could with the skills she had. The thought steadied Tonks somehow. They weren't alone in this. Even those who wouldn't fight were finding ways to help. She continued walking, her feet carrying her along the familiar route without conscious thought. Past Gladrag's wizardwear with its mannequins frozen in outdated robes. Past Scrivenshaft's quill shop, where she'd bought her first self-inking quill in 3rd year and promptly splattered ink all over her herbology essay. Past Dervish and Bangi's, where the remembrall she'd given herself for her 17th birthday had been repaired after she dropped it down a moving staircase. Each shop held memories. Each darkened window reflected a piece of her past back at her. Hogsmeade had been the first taste of freedom for a sheltered Hufflepuff girl who'd grown up in a loving but cautious household. These streets had meant adventure, independence, the thrilling knowledge that she was part of the wizarding world in a way that went beyond textbooks and wand movements. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might die defending a village she'd once associated purely with joy. A slight breeze picked up, carrying with it the scent of the forbidden forest, pine and earth, and something wilder, something that had never been and would never be tamed. Tonks paused again, this time near the Shrieking Shack, that infamous building squatting on its hill like a sullen toad. Even now, even with everything else happening, people avoided it. Superstition died hard. But Tonks knew its secrets, knew what had happened within those walls, knew the pain and transformation that had taken place there month after month, year after year, knew that the boy who'd suffered there had grown into the man she loved more than she'd ever imagined possible. Remus. His name in her mind sent cascading color changes through her hair. Gold for love so fierce it frightened her, silver grey for worry that never quite left, a flash of bright yellow for the unexpected joy he'd brought to her life. She touched her stomach reflexively, though there was no longer any visible sign of the pregnancy that had changed everything. Teddy, Edward Remus Lupin, named for both his grandfathers, currently safe with Andromeda, Tonks in a cottage protected by every ward and charm Tonks and Remus could devise. 3 months old, with a tuft of turquoise hair that had made them both laugh through their tears. A metamorphmagus like his mother, gifted and cursed with the ability to change his appearance at will. What would he think of her, this son she might never see grow up? Would Andromeda tell him stories? Would she explain why his mother had walked away from him when he was still so tiny, still so new to the world? I'm making the world safer for you, Tonks thought fiercely, her hair flashing scarlet. I'm fighting so you'll never have to. But the fear remained, cold and insistent, beneath the determination. What if the world they were fighting for never came? What if all they managed was to fall one by one until darkness covered everything? She shook her head sharply, physically trying to dislodge the thought. Oral training had taught her better than this. Fear was natural, expected even, but dwelling on it served no purpose. You acknowledged it, set it aside, and focused on what needed to be done. What needed to be done tonight was simple enough. Reach Hogwarts, take her position in the defenses, and fight when the time came. Everything else, all the fear and love and desperate hope, had to be compressed down into a small, tight space where it couldn't interfere with the work at hand. Tonks looked up at the castle, properly looked at it for the first time since arriving in Hogsmeade. It dominated the landscape, rising from its rocky promontory like something from a fairy tale. Towers and turrets silhouetted against the darkening sky, windows beginning to glow with candlelight, the whole massive structure somehow managing to appear both solid and magical at once. Home. The thought came unbidden, but Tonks didn't try to dismiss it. Hogwarts was home in a way that went beyond the years she'd spent as a student. It was the place where she discovered who she was, where awkward Nymphadora Tonks had become just Tonks, where she'd found friends who didn't care that she couldn't control her powers, where she'd learned that being different wasn't something to hide, but something to celebrate. The Hufflepuff common room with its round doors and copper accents, always warm, always welcoming. The greenhouses where Professor Sprout had patiently taught her the difference between fluxweed and flitterbloom. The Great Hall at Halloween, floating pumpkins casting orange light on upturned faces. The library during exam season, Tonks desperately trying to understand the finer points of conjuration, while her study group whispered encouragement and smuggled chocolate. 7 years of memories soaked into those stones. 7 years of growing up, making mistakes, learning magic and life in equal measure. 7 years of being part of something larger than herself. And now she was walking back to defend it, to stand between the castle and those who would see it fall, to protect not just the physical structure, but everything it represented: sanctuary, learning, hope, the belief that magic could be used for good, and that differences made them stronger rather than weaker. The shadows were lengthening now, the mountain ridges cutting sharp lines against a sky turning from blue to purple, to the deep indigo that preceded true darkness. Stars were beginning to appear, faint at first, then stronger. As she watched, the moon would rise later, nearly full. Good for seeing, bad for hiding. Tonks started walking again, leaving Hogsmeade proper behind and following the path that led up toward the castle. It was a walk she'd made hundreds of times, thousands perhaps. As a student returning from village weekends, arms full of sweets and joke shop treasures. As a young Auror visiting Dumbledore to report on Death Eater activity. As a member of the Order of the Phoenix, attending meetings in offices and safe rooms, planning strategies that had ultimately proven insufficient. The path wound upward, and Tonks let her legs find the rhythm, her breathing deepening as the incline increased. Physical exertion helped. It gave her mind something to focus on besides the growing pressure in her chest, the tightness in her throat that threatened tears she absolutely would not shed. Not yet. There would be time for tears later, whether tears of grief or tears of relief remained to be seen. But not now. Now required steady hands and a clear head and the particular brand of grim determination that had gotten her through Aura training and dark wizard confrontations and every other impossible situation she'd faced. Her hair had settled into a deep magenta, she noticed distantly. Not quite pink, not quite purple. The color of twilight, of transitions, of standing on the border between one state and another. Fitting. To her left, she could see Hagrid's hut, dark and silent. The gamekeeper was in the castle already, she knew, preparing defenses, moving creatures to safety, doing whatever Hagrid did with that mixture of gentleness and surprising competence that had always characterized him. She'd seen him earlier, briefly, his face grave beneath his wild beard. He tried to smile at her, but it hadn't reached his eyes. No one's smiles were reaching their eyes today. The Whomping Willow stood ahead and to the right, its branches motionless for once. Even that violent tree seemed to sense the weight of what was coming, Tonks thought fancifully. Or perhaps it was simply waiting, conserving its energy for the violence that would soon be required of everything and everyone in range of the castle. She gave it a wide berth anyway. Respect for dangerous magical creatures was a lesson learned early and reinforced often in her profession. The path continued upward, and with each step, Tonks felt the castle's magic more strongly. It wasn't something she could see or hear exactly, but rather something felt. A subtle pressure on her skin, a thrumming in her bones, a sensation of enormous power held carefully in check. Hogwarts was old, far older than anyone alive, and its magic had seeped into every stone, every flagstone, every inch of wood and glass and iron. That magic would help tonight. The castle would defend itself and its inhabitants with everything it had. But would it be enough? It has to be enough, Tonks thought, because there's no alternative. The alternative was unthinkable. Voldemort controlling Hogwarts, controlling the education of young witches and wizards, poisoning minds just as he'd poisoned society. The alternative was darkness spreading, until there was nothing left but fear and oppression, and the slow death of everything good in the magical world. So the alternative simply could not be allowed to happen. Her hand drifted to her pocket, where a folded piece of parchment rested against her hip. The letter wasn't written yet. That would come later when she found a quiet moment. But she'd brought the parchment because she needed to write it, needed to put into words everything she wanted Teddy to know, to understand, to carry with him if she wasn't there to tell him herself. The thought made her hair flash blue, brilliant and undeniable before she could control it. But there was no one to see, no one to notice. The fear she was trying so hard to contain Tonks stopped walking and looked back over her shoulder. Hogsmeade spread below her lights, beginning to appear in a few windows now, as darkness settled more firmly. Beyond the village, the mountains rolled away into distance and shadow. Somewhere beyond those mountains was the cottage where her mother sang lullabies to a turquoise-haired baby, where safety and love created a small bubble of normalcy in a world gone mad. "I'm doing this for you," Tonks whispered into the wind. "Both of you." Then she turned back toward Hogwarts, squared her shoulders, and continued climbing into the gathering dark. The castle waited above her, ancient and powerful and patient, its windows glowing like eyes keeping watch over all who approached. Tonks's hair settled into a steady, determined pink, her color, her choice, her armor against everything to come. She walked on. The Hogshead Inn crouched at the end of its street like a sullen animal, its windows grimy even in the best of times, its sign creaking in the slight breeze that had picked up as true darkness settled over Hogsmeade. Tonks approached it with the wariness of someone who'd spent too many years as an aura, not to recognize potential danger in every shadow. But tonight, the Hogshead was as close to safe as anywhere in the village. Aberforth Dumbledore was inside. She could see his silhouette moving past one of the cleaner patches of window, and whatever else the old barman was, he was firmly on their side. Had been, she knew now, for longer than most of them had realized. She didn't go inside. Instead, she slipped around the side of the building to where a small courtyard opened up, barely more than a gap between structures, with a single wooden bench that looked like it might collapse if someone heavier than her sat down. The space was sheltered from the wind and, more importantly, hidden from casual observation. Tonks settled onto the bench carefully, felt it creak but hold, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hair flickered through several colors in quick succession: pink, purple, blue, back to pink, before she closed her eyes and willed it to stillness. When she opened them again and caught her reflection in a darkened window across the way, her hair had settled into a soft rose gold that glimmered in the faint light from the stars overhead. The color of dawn, she thought, the color of hope struggling to emerge from darkness. She pulled the parchment from her pocket, smoothing it carefully across her knee. The paper was fine quality, expensive. She'd bought it months ago specifically for this purpose, though she'd been putting off actually using it. Some part of her had believed that if she didn't write the letter, she wouldn't need to, that somehow avoiding this final preparation would mean she'd survive. But that was foolish thinking, the kind of superstition she should have outgrown. The letter needed to be written whether she survived or not. Teddy deserved to have her words, her thoughts, something of her mother beyond the stories others would tell. Tonks drew her wand, whispered "Lumos," and a soft white light bloomed from its tip. She adjusted the intensity carefully, enough to see by, but not so bright it would draw attention. Then she conjured a small writing desk. Nothing fancy, just a flat surface that hovered at the right height, and positioned the parchment on it. For a long moment, she simply stared at the blank page. Where did you even start with something like this, dear Teddy, if you're reading this? I'm dead. Too blunt, too harsh. My darling son, I want you to know how much I love you. Too sentimental, too likely to make her cry before she'd written 3 sentences. Dear Teddy, she finally wrote her quill, scratching softly against the parchment. I'm writing this on the night before a battle, which probably sounds very dramatic and serious. Your mother was never very good at serious. Ask anyone who knew me at Hogwarts. They'll tell you I once turned my nose into a duckbill during a transfiguration exam because I was nervous and my metamorphmagus powers went haywire. Better, lighter, more like herself. Teddy would have enough sorrow in his life if she didn't make it through tomorrow. He didn't need her letter adding to it. The thing is, she continued, I need you to understand why I'm here instead of home with you. You're only 3 months old right now, sleeping in your cradle with your hair changing colors every time you dream. You got that from me, obviously. Your dad's hair stays firmly brown even when he's asleep, which I've always thought was a bit boring of him. Her hair flickered to gold as she thought of Remus, warm and bright as sunlight. She could picture him so clearly, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he held Teddy, the particular tone his voice took on when he read bedtime stories aloud, doing all the character voices even though no one but her was listening. "Your father is one of the bravest men I've ever known," Tonks wrote, "and I've known quite a few brave people in my time. He's also one of the kindest, even though life hasn't been particularly kind to him. He'll probably tell you about his condition, about being a werewolf, with a lot of apology and worry in his voice. Don't let him do that. Being a werewolf is part of who he is, but it's not all of who he is, and it certainly doesn't make him less worthy of love. I need you to understand that, Teddy. I need you to remind him of it, because he forgets sometimes." The words were flowing more easily now, her quill racing across the parchment, as if trying to keep up with the thoughts tumbling through her mind. Her hair shifted to silver grey, the colour of worry and love intertwined. "Your grandmother Andromeda is taking care of you right now. She's brilliant, my mum. Tough as dragon hide on the outside, but soft as a puffskein once you get past her defences. She lost her husband, your grandfather Ted, recently. He was Muggle-born, you see, and there are people in our world who think that makes someone less valuable, less magical, less worthy of existing." Tonks paused, her quill hovering over the parchment. "How did you explain prejudice to a child? How did you make sense of something that made no sense? That's what we're fighting against," she wrote finally. "Not just one bad wizard, though he's certainly bad enough, but an entire way of thinking. The idea that some people are better than others because of who their parents were, or what their blood status is, or how much gold they have in Gringotts. It's rubbish, Teddy. Complete and utter rubbish. And it's worth fighting against." Her hair flashed red, fierce, determined, angry at the injustice of it all. But she took a breath, centered herself, and continued writing. "Your grandfather, Ted, used to tell me that love was the most powerful magic there was. I thought he was being sentimental, just saying the kind of thing parents say. But then I met your father, and then you came along, and I realized he was right. The love I feel for you and for Remus, it's bigger than any spell I learned at Hogwarts, stronger than any curse I faced as an aura. It's the kind of magic that makes you willing to do impossible things." A drop of water splashed onto the parchment, and Tonks realized with some surprise that she was crying. She wiped her eyes roughly with her free hand, careful not to smudge the ink, and her hair flickered to deep blue, the color of sadness, of grief held at bay, but not defeated. "I'm not trying to be morbid," she wrote, "but if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it through tomorrow. And I need you to know that it's all right. I made my choice freely. I could have stayed hidden, could have kept myself safe for your sake. But what kind of world would I have been saving you for? One where people like your grandfather are hunted, where your father has to hide what he is, where you might be persecuted for your gifts instead of celebrated for them. Number. Better to fight. Better to stand up and say, this ends here, this ends now, this ends with us." Tonks set down her quill and flexed her fingers, which had cramped slightly from gripping too tightly. Around her, the night continued its progression toward true darkness. The stars were fully visible now, sharp and cold and beautiful in the way distant things always were. She wondered if Teddy would look up at these same stars someday, wondered if he'd think of her. "I want to tell you about Hogwarts," she wrote, picking up the quill again. "I want you to know what I'm defending and why it matters so much. Hogwarts is, well, it's impossible to describe properly. It's a school, yes, but it's so much more than that. It's a castle that's been standing for 1,000 years, soaking up magic and history and the dreams of every student who's walked its corridors. It's the place where young witches and wizards learn not just spells and potions, but who they are and who they want to become. Her hair shifted to yellow, Hufflepuff yellow, bright and warm and loyal. I was a Hufflepuff, which probably won't surprise you, given how your grandmother describes me. Loyal to a fault, she says, usually right before telling me I'm being too trusting or too willing to see the best in people. But Hufflepuff was perfect for me. We're the house that values hard work, dedication, loyalty, fair play. We're the ones who show up and do the work, even when it's not glamorous or exciting. We're the ones who stand by our friends no matter what. The Hufflepuff common room is round and cozy, all warm wood and copper accents, with plants everywhere because we're near the greenhouses. It always smells like earth and growing things, and the furniture is worn smooth by generations of students. I used to spend hours there, curled up by the fire with my friends, studying or gossiping, or just existing together in comfortable silence. Tonks smiled at the memory, her hair brightening to a more golden yellow. I made my best friends there. People who didn't care that I couldn't walk across a room without tripping over my own feet, who laughed with me instead of at me when I accidentally gave myself a pig's snout in Transfiguration, who kept my secrets and shared their own. That's what Hogwarts does. Teddy. It gives you a place to belong, a community that becomes family, and the magic. The castle itself is magical in ways that have nothing to do with spells. The staircases move. I never did figure out their pattern, if they even have one. The portraits talk and gossip and offer advice, though you have to be careful which ones you listen to. The suits of armor sometimes sing late at night, which is both charming and slightly disturbing. The ghosts are generally friendly, especially. Nearly Headless Nick, who's dramatic but well-meaning. She was writing faster now, the memories pouring out of her like water from a burst pipe. The Great Hall has a ceiling that looks like the sky, not an illusion, but actually showing what's happening outside. Floating candles, 4 long house tables, the professors at the high table watching over everything. I've eaten thousands of meals there, celebrated countless holidays, taken exams that made my hands shake, celebrated countless holidays, taken exams that made my hands shake, received news both wonderful and terrible. It's the heart of Hogwarts, the place where the whole school comes together. The library is enormous, full of books that smell like old paper and leather and magic. The greenhouses are where Professor Sprout teaches. She was head of Hufflepuff when I was there, and she's the reason I passed my herbology NWT. The dungeons are cold and smell like potion ingredients, not particularly pleasant, but somehow still nostalgic. The astronomy tower has the best views, though you're not supposed to go there outside of class. Her hair flickered through multiple colors as different memories surfaced. Pink for the joy of learning she could transform her appearance at will, purple for late nights cramming for exams, blue for the homesickness of first year, gold for friendships that had lasted beyond graduation. I'm telling you all this, Tonks wrote, because I want you to understand what Hogwarts means. It's not just a building or a school. It's a symbol of everything good about our world. The belief that magic should be shared, that everyone deserves education, regardless of their background. The differences make us stronger rather than weaker. That there's light and wonder and beauty worth preserving. That's what I'm fighting for tomorrow. Not just the castle, though I love it dearly, but the idea it represents. The future where you can attend Hogwarts and feel safe there, where you can learn and grow and become whoever you're meant to be without fear. Tonks paused, her quill hovering above the parchment again. The next part was harder, the part where she had to acknowledge possibilities she didn't want to consider. "If I don't survive tomorrow," she wrote carefully, "I need you to know certain things. First, this is not your fault. You didn't make me go into battle. I chose it freely, and I'd choose it again. Never blame yourself for my choices. Second, your father loves you beyond measure. He was terrified when we found out I was pregnant, terrified of passing on his condition, terrified of being a bad father, terrified of all the things that could go wrong. But the moment he saw you, all that fear transformed into the fiercest love I've ever witnessed. Trust him, Teddy. He'll guide you well. Third, you are loved. By me, by your father, by your grandmother, by everyone who knows you. You came into this world during dark times, but you brought light with you. Your smile, your laughter, the way your hair changes color when you're happy. These are gifts, Teddy. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Her hair was cycling through colors rapidly now, emotion overwhelming her control. Gold for love, blue for sorrow, red for fierce determination, silver for worry, yellow for Hufflepuff loyalty, pink for the personality she'd claimed as her own. Fourth, be kind, but don't be a pushover. Stand up for what's right, but know when to ask for help. Work hard, but remember to laugh. Take risks, but not stupid ones. Actually, take some stupid ones too, just not too many. Love fiercely. Fight for what matters. Remember that blood status is rubbish, and anyone who tells you otherwise is a git. Tonks found herself smiling through her tears, her hair settling into a warm rose gold. Fifth, visit Hogwarts when you can. Walk the corridors, sit by the lake, climb to the astronomy tower. Feel the magic in the stones, and know that I walked there too. Know that I loved it there, that it shaped who I became, that it's part of your heritage, just as much as the Tonks family magic or the Lupin name. And finally, be yourself, Teddy. Being a metamorphmagus means you can be anyone, look like anyone, but the real magic is in choosing to be yourself. I learned that the hard way, spent too many years trying to be what others expected instead of embracing who I actually was. Don't make my mistake. Be loud, be quiet, be serious, be silly. Be whatever feels true to you in any given moment. That's real bravery, being authentically yourself, even when it's easier to hide. She was nearly at the bottom of the parchment now, the space for words running out, just as her thoughts threatened to overflow completely. "I love you, Teddy," she wrote, her hand shaking slightly. "I love you with every fiber of my being, with magic I didn't know I possessed until you existed. You are my greatest achievement, my most important legacy, the best thing I ever helped create. And if I die tomorrow, I die knowing that you're in the world, bringing light and color and joy wherever you go. Make it count, little one. Make it all count. Your loving mother, Nymphadora Tonks. Though everyone calls me just Tonks, and you can too if you want, I won't mind." She set down her quill with trembling hands and stared at the letter, reading it over once, then twice. The words blurred slightly through her tears, but she didn't wipe them away this time. Let them fall. Let them mark the parchment with the physical evidence of her love and fear and desperate hope. With careful movements, Tonks folded the letter precisely, creasing each edge with deliberate attention. Then she drew her wand and whispered a series of protective charms, preservation spells to keep the ink from fading, waterproofing charms, even a minor security enchantment that would ensure only Teddy could open it when he was old enough to understand. The final charm was the most complex, one she'd researched specifically for this purpose. It would keep the letter hidden until Teddy turned 11, the age when he'd receive his Hogwarts letter, the age when he'd be old enough to understand what she'd written without being destroyed by it. Tempus Reveler, she whispered, her wand tracing an intricate pattern over the folded parchment. The letter glowed softly for a moment, then the light faded, leaving only ordinary-looking paper behind. Tonks tucked it carefully into her inner pocket, right over her heart. Tomorrow, before the battle began, she'd give it to someone trustworthy. Minerva McGonagall, perhaps, or Kingsley Shacklebolt. Someone who would ensure it reached her mother, who would keep it safe until the designated time. She extinguished her wand light and sat in the darkness for a moment, letting the night sounds wash over her. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. Closer by, she could hear the faint murmur of voices from inside the hogshead. Aberforth speaking to someone, though she couldn't make out the words. The wind rustled through her hair, which had finally settled into a calm, determined pink. "We'll make the world better for you," Tonks whispered into the darkness, a promise to the son who couldn't hear her. "I swear it." Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and turned toward the castle that waited above. The letter was written. The promises were made. Now came the part where she had to fight to ensure those promises could be kept. Tonks walked back into the night, her footsteps steady, her hair pink as bubblegum and bright as courage, heading toward whatever tomorrow would bring. The path from Hogsmeade to Hogwarts had never seemed quite so long before. Tonks had walked it hundreds of times, as a student eager to return to the castle after a Saturday in the village, as an aura on official business, as a member of the Order attending secret meetings. But tonight, with each step taking her closer to what awaited, the distance stretched like something elastic and unforgiving. Her boots found the worn grooves in the packed earth, following the track that generations of feet had carved into the hillside. The moon had risen while she'd been writing, hanging fat and nearly full in the sky, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Good for visibility, terrible for concealment. Tomorrow, when the fighting started, that moon would illuminate friend and foe alike with impartial clarity. Tonks's hand drifted to her wand, almost unconsciously, fingers wrapping around the familiar wood with the ease of long practice. Rowan and unicorn hair, 9.5 inches, reasonably pliant. She'd gotten it at Ollivander's when she was 11, a nervous girl with mousy brown hair that she hadn't yet learned to change at will, accompanying her mother through Diagon Alley with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. The wand had chosen her, as wands did. Ollivander had seemed pleased with the match, though he'd given her the same unnerving stare he gave everyone, those pale eyes seeing things that went beyond wood and core and length. Rowan, for clear-headed thinking and protection, he'd said in that soft, peculiar voice of his. unicorn hair for consistency and faithfulness. A good combination for one who will need both courage and constancy. At 11, she hadn't understood what he meant. At 25, having survived aura training and dark wizard encounters and the constant grinding fear of war, she understood perfectly. The wand felt heavier tonight than usual. Or perhaps it was just that she was more aware of its weight, of what it represented. This piece of wood and magical core was both her greatest tool and her most solemn responsibility. With it, she could defend, protect, heal. With it, she could also harm, destroy, kill. She'd killed before. Twice. Both times in direct combat. Both times because it was her life or theirs. Both times against Death Eaters, who would have murdered her without hesitation. The training at Aura headquarters had prepared her for the mechanics of lethal force, the spells to use, the stances to take, the split-second decisions that meant survival. What the training hadn't prepared her for was how it felt afterward. The weight of having ended a life, even a life dedicated to cruelty and darkness. The knowledge that some family somewhere had lost a son or brother or father, regardless of what choices that person had made. Mad-Eye Moody, her mentor during training, had been characteristically blunt about it. "You'll feel bad the first time," he'd growled, his magical eye spinning in its socket while his normal eye fixed her with uncomfortable intensity. Maybe the second time too. But you do it anyway, because the alternative is worse. You do it, and you live with it, and you don't let it slow you down when the next fight comes. She thought him callous then. Now she understood. He'd been honest. War didn't allow for the luxury of extended mourning, not when the next battle was always waiting. Her hair shifted to deep purple as the memories washed over her. Determination edged with the kind of darkness that came from knowing exactly what tomorrow would demand. She would fight. She would use every spell she knew, every trick she'd learned, every ounce of magic she possessed. And if that meant killing again, if that meant carrying more weight in her soul, then so be it. The alternative was Voldemort's victory. The alternative was a world where her son grew up hunted or hidden or twisted into something unrecognizable by prejudice and fear. The alternative was unthinkable. So she would fight, and if necessary, she would kill. And somehow, if she survived, she would learn to live with what she'd done. To her left, the forbidden forest loomed dark and impenetrable, its trees ancient and full of secrets. Tonks could feel the wild magic emanating from it, different from the structured magic of spells and incantations. This was older, rawer, the kind of power that had existed before witches and wizards learned to channel magic through wands and words. During her 5th year, she and a group of Hufflepuffs had dared each other to enter the forest at night. They'd made it perhaps 20 feet before the sounds, things moving in the darkness, branches breaking, inhuman voices calling in languages they didn't understand, had sent them running back to the safety of the castle. She'd been terrified then. Now, ironically, the forest felt almost comforting. It was dangerous, yes, but honestly so. The trees didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. The creatures within didn't hide their nature behind masks of civility. There was a purity to that kind of danger, a straightforwardness that war lacked entirely. Tomorrow, some of those creatures would fight. The centaurs might join them. Firenze was teaching at Hogwarts now, and his presence suggested the herd might take a side. The Thestrals would be used for transport and reconnaissance, their ability to see death making them invaluable for finding the wounded. Even the Acromantulas might be driven from their colony, though whether they'd fight for Hogwarts or simply for their own survival remained uncertain. Tonks shuddered slightly at the thought of the giant spiders. She'd encountered them once during an aura investigation into illegal magical creature trading, and the experience had left her with a healthy respect for their lethality. Aragog, the ancient spider that Hagrid had befriended, was dead now. She'd attended his funeral, actually, standing at the edge of the forest while Hagrid wept over the massive corpse. But his offspring remained, hundreds of them, each the size of a small cart, and possessed of both intelligence and hunger. If they entered the battle, things would become even more chaotic. But chaos could be an ally if you knew how to use it. Mad-Eye had taught her that too, how to turn disorder to your advantage, how to create opportunities in the midst of mayhem, how to survive when everything around you was falling apart. Constant vigilance, he used to bellow at the training recruits, his magical eye spinning wildly while his staff struck the ground for emphasis. The moment you relax is the moment you die. Tonks smiled despite everything, her hair flickering briefly toward pink before settling back to purple. Mad-Eye had been exhausting and paranoid and completely impossible to please, but he'd been a brilliant teacher. Everything she knew about combat, about survival, about reading situations and people and danger, she owed to him. His loss, months ago, had hit her harder than she'd expected. It seemed indestructible, too ornery and suspicious to ever be caught off guard. But everyone died eventually, even the legendary Alastair Moody. She cut the thought off sharply, refusing to follow it to its logical conclusion. Not helpful, not productive. Focus on what was ahead, not what might happen. Hagrid's hut appeared to her right, dark and silent. No smoke rose from its chimney, no light glowed in its windows. The gamekeeper was at the castle already, she knew, probably fussing over the creatures in his care, making sure they were safe or ready to fight, depending on their nature. Fang, his boarhound, would be with him. Too old for battle, but loyal enough to stay by Hagrid's side regardless. The hut looked smaller than she remembered, more vulnerable. It was just wood and stone, really, barely held together by magic, and Hagrid's stubborn refusal to fix things properly. One good fire curse would reduce it to ash. The thought made her hair flash red for a moment. Protective fury at the idea of Hagrid losing his home, the place he'd lived for decades, the refuge he'd created for himself and his creatures. So many things could be lost tomorrow. So many places and people and pieces of history. The castle itself was ancient enough to have survived wars before, but that was no guarantee it would survive this one. Voldemort didn't want to preserve Hogwarts. He wanted to conquer it, to remake it in his image, to twist it into a factory for producing wizards who thought as he did. That couldn't be allowed. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, that future had to be prevented. The Whomping Willow stood ahead now, its branches still and almost peaceful in the moonlight. Tonks knew better than to trust that stillness. The tree was always dangerous, always waiting to strike at anything that came within range. There was something almost admirable about its single-minded dedication to violence, It didn't have doubts or fears or moral complications. It simply attacked, instinctively and without hesitation. Must be simpler, being a tree. She gave it the wide berth it demanded, skirting around the edge of its territory with practiced care. As she passed, she caught a glimpse of the knot at the base of the trunk, the one that would freeze the tree if pressed correctly. Remus had shown her once, years ago, back when they were just colleagues in the Order and nothing more. He'd been reluctant to reveal the secret, even to her, his face shadowed with memories of the boys who'd discovered it first. James figured it out, he'd said quietly. He and Sirius. They became animagi so they could keep me company during transformations. Can you imagine? Spending 3 years learning some of the most complex magic there is, risking expulsion and worse. Also, their friend wouldn't have to be alone. The love in his voice when he spoke about his friends. The grief too, for James was dead, and Sirius had only recently been proven innocent after 12 years in Azkaban, had been what first made Tonks look at Remus as more than just a colleague. That capacity for devotion, for loyalty that transcended death itself, for carrying love and loss with equal grace. She'd fallen in love with him slowly, then all at once, like walking down a gentle slope that suddenly became a cliff. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late to stop. Not that she'd wanted to stop. Even knowing his condition, even understanding the complications it would bring, even facing his stubborn conviction that he wasn't good enough for her, she'd wanted him with a fierce certainty that surprised them both. Her hair shifted to gold, bright and warm as summer sun. Love. That's what this was all for, ultimately. Not just romantic love, though that was part of it, but all kinds of love. The love of parents for children, of friends for each other, of teachers for students, of people for their homes and communities, and the small daily magics that made life worth living. Voldemort had never understood that. For all his power, for all his magical genius, he'd fundamentally failed to grasp that love was the most powerful force in their world. Not because it was gentle or kind, though it could be both, but because it made people willing to do impossible things, to fight when the odds were hopeless, to stand when falling would be easier, to sacrifice everything for the chance that someone else might have a better tomorrow. Dumbledore had tried to explain that to Harry, according to Remus. Your mother's love saved you, the headmaster had told the boy who lived. It's a protection that runs deep, deeper than any magic I could devise. At the time, Tonks had found it a bit abstract, a bit too philosophical for practical application. Now, with her own child in the world, she understood it perfectly. The love she felt for Teddy was indeed a kind of magic, one that made her capable of facing death without flinching because his future mattered more than her present. The path began to steepen as she approached the castle proper. Her legs burned slightly with the effort of climbing, her breathing deepening. The physical exertion helped, gave her something immediate to focus on. One step, then another, then another. Simple, direct. No room for doubt or fear, just the mechanical process of moving forward. The castle loomed larger now, its bulk blotting out a good portion of the star-filled sky. Lights glowed in various windows, people moving through corridors, preparing defenses, taking up positions. How many of them would survive tomorrow? How many of those lights would be extinguished forever? Tonks's hand tightened on her wand. The wood felt warm against her palm. almost alive, responding to the magic in her blood. Wands were strange things, partnerships between wizard and wood, each enhancing the other. Without her wand, she could still do some magic. Metamorph magus transformations, simple levitation, basic charms. But for anything complex, anything powerful, anything that required precision and force, she needed this length of rowan wood with its core of unicorn hair. She wondered, briefly, what happened to wands when their owners died? Did they grieve? Did they know? Or were they simply inert objects waiting for new hands to wield them? There was a whole branch of wand lore devoted to such questions, Ollivander's specialty. Tonks had never been particularly interested in the theoretical side of magic. She'd been a practical student, more concerned with making spells work than understanding why they worked. But tonight, facing possible death, she found herself curious about these final mysteries. If she died tomorrow, would her wand break? Would it refuse to work for anyone else? Would it be buried with her, or claimed by the Ministry for Study, or simply gathered up with other lost possessions and stored in some forgotten room? Morbid thoughts, unhelpful thoughts. She shook her head sharply, physically trying to dislodge them. Focus on the present. Focus on what needed to be done. The path leveled out as she reached the plateau where Hogwarts stood. The entrance was ahead now, those massive oak doors that had welcomed and protected students for 1,000 years. How many people had passed through those doors? Millions, probably. Young witches and wizards arriving wide-eyed and nervous for their first year. Older students returning with a comfortable confidence of familiarity. Graduates leaving for the last time, carrying their education and memories into the wider world. Tonks had been all of those people at various times. The nervous 11-year-old whose hair had turned an anxious grey as she waited to be sorted. The confident 7th year who knew every shortcut and secret passage. The graduate who'd looked back at the castle from the train, already nostalgic for what she was leaving behind. And now she was returning as a defender, ready to fight and possibly die for the place that had shaped her. There was a symmetry to that, she supposed, a completion of some kind of circle. She'd been given so much by Hogwarts: education, friendship, identity, home. Now she had the chance to give something back, to stand between the castle and those who would destroy it, to be, for one night at least, the shield instead of the student. Her hair had settled into a deep, determined purple now, the color of twilight before full darkness, the color of transitions and thresholds. She was standing on one now, between the life she'd known and whatever came next, between the safety of distance and the danger of involvement, between the person she'd been and the person she'd need to become. Tonks took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cool night air. It tasted of stone and magic and the faint scent of the pine trees that dotted the grounds. It tasted of home. All right then, she murmured to herself, to her wand, to the castle waiting ahead. Let's do this. She walked forward, her boots striking the stone approach with solid, confident steps. The weight of her wand in her hand felt right now, not heavy but balanced, a tool that fit her perfectly, an extension of her will and magic and determination. Tomorrow she would fight. Tomorrow she might die. But tonight, in this moment, walking toward the castle with the moon bright above and her purpose clear, Nymphadora Tonks felt something unexpected. She felt ready. Her hair flashed bright pink, defiant as a declaration, and she smiled despite everything. Whatever came next, she would face it as herself. Clumsy, loyal, fierce, loving, flawed, and absolutely refusing to go down without a fight. The castle doors stood open ahead, warm light spilling out into the darkness, welcoming her home one more time. Tonks walked through them with her head high and her wand ready, leaving the quiet night behind and stepping into whatever tomorrow would bring. The entrance hall of Hogwarts felt different at night, especially on a night like this. During the day, it was always bustling, students rushing between classes, owls swooping in through the high windows, the constant echo of footsteps on stone and voices bouncing off the walls. But now, in the stillness before battle, it held a quality of suspended time, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. Tonks stepped through the oak doors and paused, letting them swing shut behind her with a soft boom that seemed too loud in the quiet. The torches along the walls burned with steady, enchanted flame, casting dancing shadows across the flagstones. The house point hourglasses stood against one wall, their colored gems, rubies for Gryffindor, emeralds for Slytherin, sapphires for Ravenclaw, topaz for Hufflepuff, glinting in the firelight. Her hair flickered to yellow as she looked at the Hufflepuff hourglass, warm and bright as the badger that was her house's symbol. How many points had she earned for Hufflepuff during her 7 years here? How many had she lost through her clumsiness, her tendency to speak before thinking, her habit of bending rules when loyalty demanded it? Professor Sprout had always been understanding, even when Tonks had accidentally knocked over an entire table of bouncing bulbs during a practical exam, sending the volatile plants ricocheting around the greenhouse like small, vegetative explosives. "You've got a good heart, Tonks," the herbology professor had said while helping her round up the escaped specimens. "That counts for more than a few broken pots." "Evening," came a voice from above, and Tonks looked up to see one of the portraits stirring. It was a wizard in midnight blue robes, his painted face creased with age, and what might have been wisdom, or might just have been the result of the artist's particular style. Bit late for a stroll, isn't it? Bit early for a battle, but here we are, Tonks replied, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. The portrait wizard nodded slowly. "Ah, so it's tonight then. We've been wondering. The castle's been restless all day. Can feel it in the stones, you know. When you've been a portrait as long as I have, you start to sense these things." "How long have you been hanging there?" Tonks asked, curious despite the urgency of the moment. 347 years come Michaelmas," the wizard said with a touch of pride. "Witnessed a fair few battles in my time. The castle's seen worse than whatever's coming, I'll wager, though I'll admit this feels different somehow, darker." "It is darker," Tonks said quietly. The wizard leading the attack, he split his soul into pieces, trying to make himself immortal. That's about as dark as magic gets. The portrait wizard blanched, his painted face going slightly grey. Horcruxes. Good gods. I'd hoped those particular bits of nastiness had been forgotten. Unfortunately not. Tonks shifted her weight, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. "But we're going to stop him. We have to." "Well," the wizard said, straightening in his frame with what looked like determination, "the portraits will help however we can. We can carry messages, scout enemy positions, warn of approaching danger. We're not much use in a fight, being dead. and two-dimensional and all, but we're not entirely useless. Tonks felt a rush of affection for this long-dead wizard who was still trying to help. Thank you. That means more than you might think. Good luck to you, young witch, and keep your wand hand steady. Tonks nodded and moved deeper into the castle, her boots echoing on the stone floors. The corridors were dimly lit, torches burning at intervals, but creating pools of shadow between them. It was in these shadows that Hogwarts kept its secrets, hidden passages behind tapestries, doors that appeared only on certain days, stairs that led to different places depending on when you climbed them. She knew some of those secrets. Not all. 7 years wasn't enough to uncover everything the castle held, but enough to navigate efficiently, to find shortcuts, to understand that Hogwarts was as much a living thing as a structure. The castle had personality, preferences, moods. It protected those it deemed worthy of protection and complicated the lives of those it didn't. Tonks had always felt that Hogwarts liked her in its strange architectural way. Passages opened for her when she was late to class. Stairs stayed stable when she crossed them, despite her notorious clumsiness. The castle had been kind to a young Hufflepuff who tried so hard to belong, to prove herself, to be worthy of the magic she'd been given. Now she was back to protect it, to keep it safe for future students, future clumsy Hufflepuffs who needed a place to learn and grow and discover who they were meant to be. A portrait of a medieval lady in a cone-shaped hat leaned out of her frame as Tonks passed. "The Hufflepuff girl," she observed. "I remember you. You used to walk these corridors late at night in your 7th year, practicing your metamorph magus transformations where you thought no one could see." Tonks stopped, surprised. "You remember that, of course. You were very dedicated, trying over and over to get your nose just right. Took you 3 months to master the aquiline shape." "As I recall," 2.5 Tonks corrected automatically, then smiled. "I didn't realize anyone was watching. Portraits always watch, dear. It's rather what we do. You've grown into yourself since then, I'm pleased to see." That uncertain girl would barely recognize the woman standing here now. The observation struck deeper than Tonks had expected. The portrait was right. She had changed, had grown, had become someone who could stand on the edge of battle without crumbling. That uncertain 7th year who'd practiced transformations in secret, afraid of judgment and failure, seemed like a different person entirely. "Thank you," Tonks said softly, "for noticing, for remembering." "Go on now," the medieval lady said, with something that might have been affection. "Others are waiting for you. But know that we're here, all of us portraits. We'll bear witness to whatever happens. You won't be forgotten." The words settled over Tonks like a blessing, and her hair brightened to a determined pink as she continued walking. The portraits were watching. The castle was watching. History itself was watching, ready to record what happened here, to remember the brave and mourn the fallen. She descended a staircase, one of the stationary ones, thankfully, and found herself in the corridor that led to the kitchens, and, beyond them, the Hufflepuff common room. The stone walls here were older, rougher, closer to the castle's original construction. This was one of the deepest parts of Hogwarts, built into the foundations themselves, close to the earth and far from the towers that reached toward the sky. Hufflepuffs liked being down here, close to the ground, close to growing things. Their common room was near the kitchens, which meant the scent of baking bread and roasting meat often drifted through, making the space feel warm and welcoming, even on the coldest days. Tonks had always appreciated that. The way Hufflepuff House made comfort a priority, made sure its students felt safe and fed and cared for. She reached the stack of barrels that marked the entrance to the Hufflepuff common room, arranged in a shadowed alcove that most people walked past without noticing. That was intentional, of course. Hufflepuff didn't advertise its presence. The entrance required you to tap the barrel 2 from the bottom, middle of the second row, in the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff, to gain entry. Get it wrong, and you'd be doused in vinegar, an effective, if malodorous, security measure. Tonks didn't enter. She wasn't here to go inside, just to acknowledge it somehow, to pay her respects to the place that had been her home for 7 years. She reached out and touched the barrel, feeling the cool wood beneath her palm. How many times had she tapped this entrance? Thousands, certainly. Coming back from classes, from the library, from midnight wanderings when sleep wouldn't come. Always that familiar rhythm, always the sense of coming home. Inside, she knew, the common room would be exactly as she remembered it. Round and cozy, with low ceilings and curved walls creating a space that felt like being inside a warm burrow. Copper accents everywhere, lamps, decorative pieces, the frames around the circular windows that looked out onto the grass and dandelions of the grounds. Plants hanging from the ceiling and arranged on every available surface, filling the air with the scent of earth and growing things. Comfortable chairs worn smooth by generations of students, grouped around a fireplace that always seemed to be crackling with cheerful flame. The house elves took care of the fire, she knew. They took care of so much at Hogwarts, working tirelessly in the kitchens just beyond the common room, ensuring students were fed and warm and cared for. Tonks had befriended several of them during her time here. Dinky, who always saved her an extra helping of treacle tart, and Hopper, who taught her how to tell if bread was properly proofed by the sound it made when tapped. Were the house elves scared tonight? Did they understand what was coming? Or were they simply continuing their work, preparing food and maintaining fires and cleaning corridors, because that's what they'd always done, what they knew how to do? Tonks hoped someone was looking after them, making sure they'd be safe when the fighting started. House elves were powerful in their own way, their magic different from wand-based wizardry, but no less real. But they weren't warriors. They shouldn't have to be. Getting sentimental, Tonks, she murmured to herself, but without heat. Sentiment had its place, especially tonight. Remembering what you were fighting for, what you loved, what you wanted to preserve, that was important. That's what would keep you going when exhaustion set in and fear threatened to overwhelm. She let her hand linger on the barrel for another moment, then stepped back. Her hair had cycled through several colors while she stood there. Yellow for Hufflepuff pride, gold for the warmth of remembered friendships, blue-edged with silver for the bittersweet ache of nostalgia. A house elf appeared suddenly, the way they did, with a soft pop that barely disturbed the air. It was elderly, its bat-like ears grey at the edges, its enormous eyes concerned. "Miss Tonks," it squeaked. "Hopper remembers Miss Tonks. What is Miss Tonks doing down here is dangerous tonight, very dangerous." "Hopper." Tonks crouched down to be at eye level with the house elf, genuine pleasure warming her voice. I'm just saying goodbye, I suppose, to the common room, to Hufflepuff. Hopper's eyes grew impossibly larger. Miss Tonks is going away. Not if I can help it. Tonks said with a smile that felt only slightly forced. But there's a battle coming, Hopper. You know that, right? You and the other house elves need to stay safe in the kitchens, away from the fighting. House elves is knowing, Hopper said, drawing itself up with surprising dignity. House elves is preparing. Healing potions is brewed. Bandages is ready. Soup is simmering for after. House elves is serving Hogwarts, protecting Hogwarts, same as Miss Tonks. The simple declaration, delivered with such fierce loyalty, made Tonks's throat tighten. You're braver than half the wizards I know, Hopper. Miss Tonks is brave too, Hopper said firmly. Miss Tonks is always being kind to house elves, always saying thank you, always treating us like persons. Hopper is not forgetting. None of the house elves is forgetting. Before Tonks could respond, Hopper snapped its fingers and a small package appeared in its hands. Treacle tart, the house elf said, pressing it into Tonks' hands. Miss Tonks' favorite, for energy, for remembering. Tonks accepted the package, carefully wrapped in cloth that was still warm from the oven. Thank you, Hopper. This means thank you. Hopper nodded solemnly, then disappeared with another soft pop, leaving Tonks alone in the corridor with a package of treacle tart and eyes that stung with tears she refused to shed. She tucked the package into her robes, next to the letter she'd written for Teddy. 2 tangible pieces of love, one looking forward and one looking back. Both reminders of what mattered, what was worth fighting for. The castle seemed to sigh around her, old stones settling with sounds like breathing. Or perhaps that was just her imagination, projecting a consciousness onto architecture. But Hogwarts had always felt alive to her, aware in some fundamental way that went beyond simple enchantment. I'll protect you, Tonks whispered to the castle, to the common room beyond the barrels, to the house elves working in the kitchens, to every student who'd ever found home within these walls. I promise. A portrait nearby. A stern-looking wizard with a long white beard cleared his throat. That's a heavy promise, young lady. All the important ones are, Tonks replied, straightening up. Her hair had settled into a deep, steadfast purple. Doesn't make them less necessary. The portrait studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Helga Hufflepuff would be proud of you. Loyal to the end, just as she taught. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Tonks said lightly, though they both knew it might. The end, I mean. I'm quite fond of loyalty, but I'd prefer to exercise it while alive. A faint smile crossed the painted face. Then fight well, Hufflepuff. Fight smart. And remember, sometimes the most powerful magic is simply refusing to give up. Tonks saluted the portrait with her wand, a gesture that was half serious and half playful, entirely herself. Then she turned and headed back toward the main corridors, leaving the Hufflepuff domain behind, but carrying its warmth with her. The castle stretched around her, vast and complex and full of memories. Every corridor held stories. The alcove where she'd shared her first kiss with a Ravenclaw boy whose name she could barely remember now. The classroom where she'd finally mastered the Patronus charm on her 7th attempt. The window seat where she'd sat and cried the day her grandmother died. The statue behind which she'd hidden to avoid Professor Snape after accidentally melting a cauldron in potions. 7 years of life, lived intensely of growing from girl to woman, of discovering magic and friendship and identity. 7 years that had shaped everything she'd become. And now she was defending it, standing between these memories and those who would erase them, corrupt them, twist them into something unrecognizable. Her wand felt warm in her hand, ready. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, strong and sure. Her hair glowed pink in the torchlight, defiant as a battle standard. Nymphadora Tonks walked through Hogwarts corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who knew these stones as well as she knew her own face. The portraits watched her pass, some calling encouragement, others simply bearing witness. The castle itself seemed to hum around her, magic thrumming through the foundations like a heartbeat. She was home, and she was ready to fight for it. The Great Hall waited ahead, and with it the other defenders. But for this moment, walking through the quiet corridors of Hogwarts with memories surrounding her like warm blankets, Tonks allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was about to do. She was about to go to war for the place that had taught her how to be herself, and there was nowhere else she'd rather be. The Great Hall had been transformed, and the sight of it hit Tonks like a physical blow as she stepped through the massive doorway. The 4 long house tables that normally stretched the length of the room had been pushed against the walls, creating a vast open space in the center. The enchanted ceiling still showed the night sky, stars sharp and bright, the moon hanging full and watchful, but the atmosphere below was anything but celestial. Where students once ate their meals and celebrated holidays, where the sorting hat had placed nervous first years, and where champions had been chosen for the Triwizard Tournament, there was now a makeshift hospital ward. Beds lined up in rows, white sheets crisp and waiting. Tables held medical supplies, potions in neat arrays, bandages stacked high, stretchers leaning against the walls. Madame Pomfrey moved between the preparations with the focused efficiency of someone who'd seen battle casualties before, directing a handful of older students who were helping with the setup. Tonks's hair flickered from pink to blue before she could control it. This was real. This was happening. The Great Hall was being prepared for the wounded, for the dying, for the aftermath of violence that hadn't even begun yet. Tonks, a familiar voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, and she turned to see Kingsley Shacklebolt striding towards her, his deep voice steady and reassuring, even in the chaos. The tall Aura looked as composed as ever, his bald head gleaming in the floating candlelight, his purple robes immaculate despite the late hour. "Kingsley," Tonks said, relief flooding through her. Working alongside Kingsley always made her feel more capable, more focused. He had that effect on people, a calm competence that steadied those around him. "Good, you're here," he said, clasping her shoulder briefly. "We're organizing the defense perimeters. McGonagall wants experienced fighters at key positions, the main entrance, the courtyards, the bridges. Can you take the section near the astronomy tower? You know that area well." "I can do that," Tonks confirmed, her hair settling into a determined red. Action, strategy, things she could control. This was better than standing around contemplating transformed great halls. The students had been evacuated, most of them anyway. Kingsley continued, his voice dropping lower. Some of the older ones insisted on staying. McGonagall's trying to organize them into support roles, keeping them away from the front lines. That'll last about 5 minutes once the fighting starts, Tonks said dryly. You remember being 17. Tell them to stay safe, and they'll do the exact opposite. A flicker of something, amusement or concern, or perhaps both, crossed Kingsley's face, which is why we need to end this quickly, before youthful bravado gets anyone killed. They both knew that was optimistic thinking, but neither said so aloud. Some truths didn't need speaking. Remus? Tonks asked, trying to keep her voice casual and probably failing. Last I saw, he was with the Order members near the entrance hall, Kingsley said, and his expression softened slightly. Go find him if you need to. We've got time yet. Tonks nodded gratefully and moved deeper into the great hall, weaving between the rows of waiting beds. Other people were scattered throughout the space. Witches and wizards she recognized from the Order, some teachers, a few parents who'd come to fight alongside their children's generation. Everyone wore the same expression, grim determination layered over barely concealed fear. Near the far wall, she spotted Professor Sprout directing 2 house elves who were levitating crates of what looked like healing herbs from the greenhouses. The herbology professor's usually cheerful face was set in lines of worry, her grey hair escaping from beneath her patched hat. Professor, Tonks called out, changing direction to approach her former head of house. Sprout turned, and her expression immediately brightened with recognition. Tonks. Oh, my dear girl. She pulled Tonks into a brief, fierce hug that smelled of earth and dittany. Look at you, all grown up and coming back to fight for old Hogwarts. Couldn't stay away, Tonks said, returning the embrace. You know Hufflepuffs, loyal to a fault. Not a fault, Sprout said firmly, pulling back but keeping her hands on Tonks's shoulders. Never a fault. Loyalty is what's going to win this fight. Mark my words. Loyalty and the kind of stubborn determination that makes people stand when everything says they should run. You're staying? Tonks asked, though she already knew the answer. Of course I'm staying, Sprout said, almost indignant. This is my school, my students, my life's work. You think I'd let some power-mad dark wizard waltz in and take it without a fight? She gestured to the crates around her. Besides, someone needs to make sure the healing supplies are properly organized. Half these young people don't know a Wigan tree bark from a wormwood stem. Despite everything, Tonks smiled. Still teaching, then, always, Sprout said, and her weathered face softened. That's what we do here, isn't it? We teach, we protect, we make sure the next generation knows what matters. She squeezed Tonks's shoulder once more. You were always one of my best, you know. Not the most talented at herbology, perhaps, but one of the most dedicated. You kept trying even when you failed, kept showing up even when it was hard. That's what I remember about you, Tonks, that stubborn refusal to quit. The words lodged somewhere in Tonks's chest, warm and painful at once. Thank you, Professor, for everything, for being there when I needed someone to believe in me. Oh, my dear, Sprout said, her eyes suspiciously bright. I always believed in you. Now go on. I'm sure you have places to be, people to see. And Tonks, keep your wand steady and your heart strong. We'll get through this. Tonks nodded, not trusting her voice, and moved away before the emotion could overwhelm her. Her hair had gone gold, warm and bright with gratitude and affection, before fading back to pink as she walked. She spotted more familiar faces as she crossed the hall. Flitwick, the tiny charms professor, was conferring with a group of older students about shield enchantments. his high voice carrying clearly despite his small stature. Slughorn, looking decidedly uncomfortable in battle robes instead of his usual velvet suits, was checking potion bottles with shaking hands. Even Trelawney had emerged from her tower, though she kept muttering about dire portents and Saturn's unfortunate alignment, which wasn't helping anyone's morale. Near the doors that led to the kitchens, a witch Tonks didn't recognize was organizing what looked like communication charms, small silver devices that would allow different sections of the castle to stay in contact during the battle. Smart thinking. Battles were won or lost on information as much as firepower. Watcher, stranger. The familiar voice made Tonks spin around, and there he was. Remus Lupin, looking tired and worried and dear, standing near one of the hospital beds, with his robes dusty and his hair mussed. His face lit up when he saw her. That smile she'd fallen in love with, transforming his careworn features into something younger, brighter. Remus, she breathed, and suddenly she was moving toward him, not caring who saw, not caring about anything except reaching him. He met her halfway, his arms coming around her immediately, pulling her close. For a moment, they just held each other, breathing in sync, drawing comfort from the simple fact of presence. Tonks buried her face in his shoulder and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The fear, the love, the desperate need for this to not be the last time. "You made it," Remus murmured into her hair. "I was starting to worry." "I'm here," Tonks said, pulling back just enough to see his face. "I wrote the letter. To Teddy. It's done." Something passed across Remus's expression, pain and pride and understanding all mixed together. "I wrote one too. This afternoon. It's with Andromeda." "Good," Tonks said fiercely. "Good. He'll have both of us then. Our words. Even if he doesn't have." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Don't," Remus said softly, framing her face with his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Don't think like that. We're going to survive this. Both of us. We're going to go home to our son and watch him grow up and bore him with stories about tonight until he begs us to stop. Promise," Tonks whispered, knowing it was unfair to ask, knowing he couldn't promise any such thing. "I promise I'll fight like hell to make it true," Remus said, and that was honest enough, real enough, to make her heart clench. "I didn't survive this long to leave you now, Dora. I've got too much to live for." Tonks's hair flashed brilliant gold, and she pulled him down into a kiss that tasted of desperation and hope in equal measure. Around them, the great hall continued its preparations, people moving with purpose, voices rising and falling, the castle breathing around them. But for this moment, there was only this. Remus's lips against hers, his hands gentle on her face, the solid reality of him, present and alive and here. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tonks rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said simply. "I need you to know that. I need it to be the last thing I say before this starts, just in case." "I love you too," Remus replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and Teddy. You're my whole world, Dora. You made me believe I could have this, could deserve this. Whatever happens tonight, know that you gave me the greatest gift of my life." They stood like that for another moment, foreheads touching, hands clasped, storing up the feeling of each other for whatever came next. Then, by unspoken agreement, they stepped apart. There would be time for more after. God's willing, there would be time for everything after. "What's your assignment?" Remus asked, shifting back into tactical mod though his hand still held hers. Astronomy Tower section, Tonks said. Kingsley wants experienced fighters at the key positions. You main entrance with Sirius and Harry, Remus said, and Tonks saw the worry flash across his face at the mention of his godson. Harry Potter, the boy who'd already sacrificed so much, who'd carry the weight of this battle regardless of the outcome, will be the first line when they come through. Be careful, Tonks said, knowing it was useless, but needing to say it anyway. Sirius especially. He's brave, but he's also reckless. Don't let him do anything stupid. A wry smile tugged at Remus's mouth. Have you met Sirius? Doing stupid things is practically his defining characteristic. But yes, I'll watch his back, and my own. Good. Tonks squeezed his hand once more, hard enough to hurt. I'll see you when this is over. We'll go home together. Together, Remus agreed, and she could hear the determination in his voice, the refusal to consider any other outcome. A commotion near the entrance made them both turn. More Order members were arriving, their faces grim but resolute. Tonks recognized Arthur Weasley, his thinning red hair bright in the candlelight, his wand already drawn. Beside him, Bill Weasley, his scarred face set in hard lines. Behind them, Mundungus Fletcher, looking distinctly uncomfortable, but present nonetheless. I should go, Tonks said, though everything in her wanted to stay, to hold on to Remus for just a few more minutes. Get to my position, check the defenses. And I should brief Harry and Sirius on the entrance strategy, Remus said. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-fashioned gallantry. Fight well, my love. Fight smart, and come back to me. You too, Tonks whispered. Then, because she couldn't help herself, she transformed her hair one more time. A rapid cycle through every color she could manage, like a rainbow at high speed, making Remus laugh despite everything. Show off, he said fondly. Always, she replied with a grin that felt almost real. They separated then, moving in different directions through the transformed Great Hall, toward different positions and different dangers. Tonks forced herself not to look back, to focus on what was ahead rather than what she was leaving behind. Looking back was for after. For now, there was only forward. She passed Kingsley again, who nodded approvingly at her purposeful stride, past a cluster of seventh years who were trying to look brave and mostly succeeding, past Professor McGonagall, who stood near the high table with her shoulders squared and her jaw set, every inch the warrior professor, despite her age. Their eyes met briefly, and McGonagall inclined her head, a gesture of respect between fighters. Tonks returned it, feeling the weight of acknowledgement settle over her. They were all in this together, student and teacher, young and old, united by the simple fact of choosing to stand. As Tonks reached the doors that would take her toward her assigned position, she paused and looked back one more time. The great hall stretched behind her, filled with preparation and people and purpose. The enchanted ceiling showed stars wheeling slowly overhead, eternal and indifferent. And somewhere in that organized chaos was Remus, her husband, the father of her child, the man who taught her that love was worth fighting for. We'll make it, Tonks whispered to herself, to him, to Teddy sleeping safe in Andromeda's cottage. We'll all make it through this. Then she turned and walked into the corridor, her hair blazing fierce red, the color of war, of courage, of absolute refusal to surrender. Behind her, The Great Hall continued its transformation from a place of learning and celebration into a place prepared for blood and pain and sacrifice, but also for healing, for hope, for the stubborn belief that morning would come again, that light would triumph over darkness, that all this preparation and pain and fear would be worth it in the end. Tonks moved through Hogwarts corridors with purpose, her wand ready, her heart steady despite its racing. The gathering storm was here, hovering just beyond the castle walls, ready to break, and she was ready to meet it. The astronomy tower rose above the rest of Hogwarts, like a sentinel, its narrow spiral staircase winding upward through centuries of stone. Tonks climbed steadily, her boots finding the worn steps with practiced ease, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. She'd made this climb countless times as a student, rushing to make it to class before Professor Sinistra locked the door, lingering after lessons to watch the stars, sneaking up here with friends for midnight conversations that had seemed terribly important at the time. Now she was climbing toward a battleground. The stairs seemed longer than she remembered, or perhaps it was just that she was hyper-aware of every detail tonight. The way the torchlight flickered against the curved walls, the slight draft that whispered down from above, the patches where the stone had been worn smooth by generations of feet. The castle was old, so impossibly old, and it remembered everything. Every student who'd climbed these stairs, every astronomer who'd charted the heavens from the platform above, every secret meeting and stolen kiss and moment of wonder. What would it remember after tonight? Tonks emerged onto the platform at the top, and the night opened around her like a vast, dark flower. The battlements offered a panoramic view of the grounds. The forbidden forest, a black mass to one side, the lake gleaming silver in the moonlight, the smaller towers and turrets of the castle spreading below like a stone garden. The wind was stronger up here, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scents of pine and water and something else, something that might have been magic itself. She wasn't alone. 2 other defenders were already positioned here. A wizard she recognized as Dawlish from the Aura office, and a witch whose face was familiar but whose name escaped her. They both nodded as Tonks approached, acknowledging her presence without unnecessary conversation. Good. Tonight wasn't the time for small talk. Tonks moved to the western edge of the platform, where she'd have a clear view of the main approaches to the castle. She checked her wand, rowan and unicorn hair, steady in her grip, and then methodically checked her pockets. Extra vials of healing potion, a handful of galleons charmed with communication spells, the letter to Teddy still safe over her heart, the wrapped treacle tart from Hopper, a tangible reminder of kindness in the midst of preparation for violence. Everything in order, everything ready. Now came the hardest part, waiting. The moon hung overhead, fat and luminous, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow, nearly full. In 2 days, it would be completely full, and Remus would transform, would become the wolf he carried inside him. But tonight, he was still human, still her husband, still fighting somewhere below in the entrance hall. Don't think about that. Don't think about all the ways this could go wrong. Tonks leaned against the battlement and let her gaze drift across the grounds. From up here, Hogwarts looked peaceful, almost serene. The lake was a sheet of dark glass, broken only by the occasional ripple from something moving beneath the surface. Merpeople, probably, aware in their own way that something momentous was approaching. The forbidden forest seemed to press closer to the castle than usual, its trees dense with shadow and ancient magic. Her hair shifted through colors without her conscious control. Pink to purple to blue to gold, a cycling rainbow of emotions she couldn't quite contain. Fear, love, determination, grief for what might be lost, hope for what might be saved. She thought about Teddy, sleeping in his cradle, his own hair changing colors as he dreamed. Did babies dream? She didn't know. There were so many things she didn't know about being a mother, so many experiences she might never have. First words, first steps, first accidental magic, first day at Hogwarts. Would he look like her, like Remus, some combination of both? Would he inherit her clumsiness along with her metamorphmagus abilities? Would he have Remus's kindness, his love of books, his terrible sense of humor? Stop it, Tonks told herself fiercely. You're going to survive. You're going to know these things because you'll be there to see them. But the doubt lingered, cold and insistent. Statistics weren't in their favor. Voldemort had an army, Death Eaters, dark creatures, giants possibly, others who'd been coerced or corrupted into service. The defenders of Hogwarts had courage and determination, and the advantage of defending familiar ground. But would it be enough? It had to be enough. Because the alternative, a sound from below made Tonks straighten, her wand rising automatically. But it was just an owl, swooping past on silent wings, hunting for prey in the grounds. She exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax. Constant vigilance, yes, but constant tension would exhaust her before the battle even began. First time? Dawlish asked from his position across the platform, his voice low. First battle like this, Tonks admitted. I've been in fights before, dual dark wizards, but nothing on this scale. It's different, Dawlish said, and something in his tone suggested he was speaking from experience. You lose track of individuals, of specific threats. Everything becomes chaos and noise and trying to stay alive moment to moment. The key is not to get overwhelmed, to focus on what's in front of you and trust others to handle what's not. Encouraging, Tonks said dryly, but she appreciated the honesty. Better to know what was coming than to be blindsided by it. The other witch spoke up for the first time. The advantage we have is love. Her voice was soft but certain. We're fighting for something. They're just fighting for power, for domination. That makes us stronger in the ways that matter. Tonks wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe that love was a shield strong enough to tear. Aside killing curses, the fighting for the right reasons somehow made you more likely to survive. But she'd been an aura long enough to know that good intentions didn't stop dark magic. You still had to be skilled, strategic, lucky. Still, there was something to it. The witch was right that they had something worth fighting for, something that gave them a reason to dig deep when exhaustion set in, to keep going when everything said to surrender. That had to count for something. We'll win, Tonks said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Not because victory was certain, there wasn't, but because they had no other choice. We have to. Time passed with the strange elasticity it always had during waiting periods, simultaneously crawling and racing, each minute feeling like an hour while whole periods slipped by unnoticed. Tonks found herself falling into the meditative state she'd learned during aura training, a kind of relaxed alertness where she remained aware of her surroundings without exhausting herself through constant hypervigilance. Her mind drifted, memories surfacing unbidden. She remembered her first night at Hogwarts, 11 years old and terrified, waiting in the entrance hall with the other first years while Professor McGonagall prepared them for the sorting. Her hair had been grey with anxiety. She hadn't learned to control it yet, and a Gryffindor boy had pointed and laughed until a bushy-haired girl elbowed him sharply in the ribs. She remembered the sorting hat on her head, its voice rough and considering in her mind. Plenty of courage, oh yes, but where to put you? You do well in Gryffindor, might find glory there. But no, I see loyalty, deep and true, and dedication that won't quit. Better be Hufflepuff. She remembered the warmth of the Hufflepuff table as she joined it, the older students making room, someone handing her a goblet of pumpkin juice, feeling immediately that she belonged. She remembered her first successful Patronus, a jackrabbit, quick and clever, bursting from her wand in a shower of silver light, while Professor Lupin, not yet Remus, not yet her husband, smiled with genuine pride. She remembered graduating, standing on the castle steps with her fellow seventh years, looking back at Hogwarts and thinking she'd never be back, that this chapter of her life was closed forever. How wrong she'd been. Here she was, returned not as a student, but as a defender, standing watch over the castle that had given her so much. Thank you, Tonks whispered to Hogwarts, to the stones beneath her feet, to the magic humming through the very foundations. Thank you for everything you gave me. I'll do everything I can to protect you. The castle didn't answer. It was a building, after all, not truly sentient. But Tonks felt something nonetheless. A sense of acknowledgement, perhaps, or maybe just the comfort of being in a place she loved, a place worth dying for if it came to that. Her hair settled into a deep purple, steadfast and calm. Movement in the forest caught her eye, something large moving between the trees. Tonks tensed her wand, rising, but the shape didn't emerge. Probably a centaur. They lived deep in the forest, proud and aloof, keeping their own counsel. Would they fight? Firenze had broken with the herd to teach at Hogwarts, an act of betrayal in centaur eyes. But perhaps when the battle came, even centaur pride would recognize that some fights required setting aside old grudges. Or perhaps not. Centaurs were stubborn, convinced of their own superiority, unwilling to involve themselves in human conflicts, even when those conflicts would affect them too. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, ancient and cold and beautiful. Tonks had never been particularly good at astronomy. All those charts and calculations had made her head spin. But she'd always loved looking at the stars themselves. They were constant, unchanging even as everything else shifted and transformed. The same stars that shone on her now had shone on the Hogwarts founders 1,000 years ago would shine on students, yet unborn 1,000 years hence. That perspective should have been comforting, a reminder that individual lives were small against the scope of cosmic time, that this battle was just one moment in an endless progression of moments. But instead, it made Tonks feel fiercely, desperately determined to make this particular moment matter, to fight so that those future students could look up at these same stars from a world not ruled by darkness and fear. Lights Dawlish said suddenly, and Tonks's attention snapped back to the immediate. He was pointing toward the main gates, where torch flames were beginning to gather, defenders taking their positions, preparing for what was coming. It's starting, the witch said, unnecessarily. Tonks's heart kicked into a higher gear. adrenaline beginning to flow. This was it. The waiting was almost over. Soon, perhaps within the hour, Voldemort and his forces would arrive, and then everything would become movement and magic and survival. She checked her wand again, a nervous habit, checked her potions, took several deep breaths, centering herself the way her training had taught her. Fear was natural, expected, but she couldn't let it control her. She needed to be sharp, focused, ready to react without hesitation. Her hair cycled through colors one more time: yellow for Hufflepuff, pink for herself, gold for love, red for battle, before settling into a fierce, determined scarlet. War color, the color of blood and courage, and absolute refusal to back down. Positions, Dawlish said quietly, and all three of them moved to strategic points around the platform. Wands out, eyes scanning the darkness for the first signs of approaching enemy. Tonks found herself at the western edge again, looking down at the path she'd walked earlier that evening. It felt like years ago now. That quiet walk from Hogsmeade, the letter writing, the memories. She was different now, not fundamentally, but in the way that crossing a threshold changes you. She'd made her choices, said her goodbyes, written her words for Teddy. Everything that needed doing was done. Now, there was only the fighting. She thought of Remus below, standing with Sirius and Harry at the main entrance. She thought of Kingsley, coordinating defenses throughout the castle. She thought of Professor Sprout arranging healing supplies, of the house elves preparing food for after, of all the defenders scattered throughout Hogwarts, each one ready to give everything for this place, for what it represented. They weren't alone. They were part of something larger, a community, a cause, a collective refusal to surrender to darkness. That had to be enough. That had to be strong enough to see them through. The moon climbed higher, indifferent and beautiful. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of coming rain. Or perhaps that was just Tonks's imagination, seeing omens in weather patterns, because the human mind craved meaning, craved signs that would tell her how this night would end. But the stars kept their secrets, and the moon said nothing, and the castle simply stood as it had stood for a millennium, solid, enduring, patient. "We'll make the world better for you," Tonks whispered one more time, thinking of Teddy, of all the children who deserve to grow up free from fear. "I promise." The night deepened around her. The vigil continued, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle grounds, an army was approaching. Tonks stood ready, her wand steady in her hand, her hair bright as a banner, her heart full of love and fear and fierce determination. Whatever came next, she would face it. She would fight. She would do everything in her power to ensure that when the sun rose tomorrow, it would rise on a world still worth living in. The waiting was almost over. The battle was about to begin. The first grey light of dawn crept across the horizon like a hesitant whisper, tentative and pale. Tonks watched it emerge from her position on the astronomy tower, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep, her body thrumming with a particular exhaustion that came from hours of sustained alertness. The night had stretched impossibly long, each hour crawling past with agonizing slowness, and yet here it was, morning, arriving whether they were ready or not. The castle grounds below were no longer dark and peaceful. Figures moved in organized patterns, defenders taking final positions, last-minute adjustments being made to shields and barriers, owls arriving with late messages from allied forces. From this height, they looked like pieces on a chessboard, each one positioned with strategic intent, each one vital to the whole. Tonks's hair had settled into a deep, burnished gold sometime during the night, and it had stayed that way as the hours passed. Gold for Teddy, gold for love, gold for the future she was fighting to protect. The color felt right, somehow felt like armor of a different kind, a reminder of what mattered when everything else became chaos and noise and survival. Movement in the forest. Dawlish called out, his voice tight with tension. Eastern Edge Tonks turned, her wand rising automatically, and saw what he meant. The tree line was stirring, shadows shifting in ways that suggested purposeful movement rather than wind. For a moment, her heart seized. Were they here already? Was this the first wave of attack? But then figures emerged into the clearing, and Tonks felt a surge of something that might have been hope. Centaurs. At least a dozen of them, their horse bodies powerful and sure, their human torsos wrapped in what looked like armor made from forest materials. They carried bows, quivers full of arrows strapped to their backs, and their faces were set with the grim determination of those who'd made a difficult choice. They were going to fight. The centaurs have chosen a side. The witch beside Tonks breathed something like awe in her voice. They never choose sides. They're choosing now, Tonks said, and her hair brightened slightly, gold becoming almost luminous. More allies, more fighters standing between the castle and darkness. It wasn't much, perhaps, a dozen centaurs against Voldemort's army, but it was something. It was the stubborn refusal to surrender that Dumbledore had always said would be their greatest weapon. More movement, this time, from the lake. Tonks strained to see in the growing light and caught glimpses of shapes beneath the surface. Merpeople, their scaled bodies glinting as they moved through the water with uncanny grace. They wouldn't leave the lake to fight, but they could defend the approaches from that direction, could harry any enemies foolish enough to try using the water as an attack route. Even Hogwarts' most distant inhabitants were preparing to defend it. "Look," Dawlish said, pointing toward the main gates, and Tonks followed his gesture to see Thestrals gathering near the entrance. The skeletal horses, visible only to those who'd witnessed death, moved with eerie silence, their leathery wings folded against their sides. Tonks could see them clearly. She'd seen death, had caused it herself in the line of duty, and the sight made her throat tighten. Beautiful and terrible, these creatures who served as both transport and reminder of mortality. The castle was gathering its forces. Every creature, every person, every magical being that called Hogwarts home or held it dear was making ready to defend it. A sound from the stairwell made all three defenders on the platform spin, wands raised. But it was just a house elf emerging onto the platform, ancient and dignified, carrying a tray laden with steaming mugs and what looked like sandwiches wrapped in cloth. "House elf brings breakfast," the creature announced, in a voice that quavered with age but held firm with purpose. "Fighters must eat, must keep strength for battle." Tonks lowered her wand and accepted a mug gratefully. The liquid inside was hot and sweet, tea with honey, perfectly prepared. The sandwich was thick with cheese and ham, simple but substantial. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "This is thank you." The house elf bowed so deeply its nose nearly touched the stone. House elves serves Hogwarts, serves those who protects Hogwarts, is honor. Then it disappeared with a soft pop, leaving them with the food and the growing light and the weight of approaching conflict. Tonks ate mechanically, forcing herself to chew and swallow even though her stomach was tight with tension. Dawlish was right. She needed the energy, needed to maintain her strength. Battles weren't won by heroes too noble to eat. They were won by people who took care of the practical necessities and then fought with everything they had. The sky continued its transformation from black to grey to the pale blue of early morning. Tonks could see more details now. Individual trees in the forest, ripples on the lake's surface, the exact positions of defenders scattered throughout the grounds. The castle itself seemed to glow in the emerging light, its ancient stones warm and golden, as if Hogwarts were gathering its own magic, preparing to defend itself with everything it had accumulated over 1,000 years. A sound rose from below, voices calling to each other, last instructions being given, wands being checked one final time. The energy had shifted from waiting to readiness, from anticipation to acceptance. This was happening. Within minutes or hours, the enemy would arrive, and then everything would become precisely what they'd been preparing for all night. Tonks finished her sandwich and set down the empty mug, wiping her hands on her robes. Her fingers found the letter in her pocket. Teddy's letter, still safe over her heart. She pulled it out, looking at the folded parchment one more time. The preservation charms she'd placed on it glimmered faintly in the dawn light, and she could feel the magic humming through it, keeping her words safe until the day her son would be old enough to read them. "For you," she whispered, touching the letter to her lips briefly before tucking it back into her pocket. "Everything I do today is for you." Movement on the path from Hogsmeade caught her attention. Tonks leaned forward, squinting against the brightening sky, and felt her heart stutter. Figures, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, moving in organized formations up the path toward the castle, dark robes billowing in the morning breeze, wands already drawn. They were here. "Incoming!" Dawlish shouted, his voice carrying across the platform and down into the castle below. Death Eaters approaching from the south. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The castle erupted into motion, defenders running to positions, shields snapping into place with audible cracks of magic voices raised in coordination and warning. From somewhere below, Tonks heard Professor McGonagall's voice, magically amplified, calling out orders with crisp authority. "Positions! All defenders to your positions. Shield teams, activate barriers. This is not a drill." Tonks's entire body shifted into combat mode, adrenaline flooding her system, fear transforming into focused determination. Her wand felt like an extension of her arm, ready and eager. Her hair blazed brilliant red, war color, battle color, the color of absolute refusal to surrender. The approaching army was close enough now that she could make out individual figures. Death Eaters, in their distinctive masks and dark robes. Giants, at least 3 of them, their massive forms towering over the human fighters. Darker shapes that might have been Dementors, though it was hard to tell in the uncertain light. And leading them all, a figure in black robes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moving with the terrible confidence of someone who'd never doubted their own power. Voldemort. Even from this distance, even without being able to see his face clearly, Tonks knew him. The Dark Lord himself, come to claim Hogwarts, to crush the last major resistance to his complete domination of the wizarding world. "Not today," Tonks said aloud, her voice steady despite the terror trying to claw its way up her throat. "Not ever." Below, on the grounds, she could see the defenders forming their lines. Kingsley's tall form was visible near the main gates, coordinating the front positions. She caught a glimpse of red hair. Arthur Weasley, probably, or one of his sons. A flash of pink robes that might have been... No, don't think about individuals. Don't think about Remus down there, about all the people she loved scattered throughout this battlefield. Focus on your section. Trust others to handle theirs. The army drew closer. Tonks could hear them now, the sound of hundreds of feet marching in rough unison, the occasional shouted command, the wordless roar of giants that made the very air vibrate. The forbidden forest seemed to lean away from them, as if even the ancient trees recognized evil and recoiled. "Steady," Dawlish said, his voice calm despite everything. "Wait for them to come into range. Don't waste spells on empty air." Tonks nodded, forcing her breathing to remain even. Her training took over. Assess the situation, identify primary threats, prioritize targets, maintain awareness of surroundings. She could do this. She trained for years to do exactly this. The first spell came from the attacking army, a curse that flashed green and deadly, arcing toward the castle's defenders. It struck a shield and dissipated in a shower of sparks. Then another curse, and another, and suddenly the air was full of magic, spells flying in both directions, the battle beginning in earnest. "Here they come," someone shouted from below, and then there was no more time for thought, only action. Tonks began casting shield charms to protect the astronomy tower approach, stunning spells aimed at the advancing Death Eaters, anything and everything she'd learned in aura training unleashed in a continuous stream of magic. Beside her, Dawlish and the witch were doing the same, their wands weaving patterns of light and protection and attack. A Death Eater apparated onto the platform, directly behind them, clever and dangerous, and Tonks spun without thinking, her wand already moving. "Stupefy!" The red light caught him square in the chest, and he crumpled, unconscious, before he hit the stone. But more were coming. They'd figured out the astronomy tower needed to be neutralized, and they were sending fighters to do it. Tonks found herself dueling two at once, dodging curses that scorched the stone where she'd been standing moments before, returning fire with everything she had. Protego! Her shield deflected a cutting curse. Expelliarmus! One Death Eater's wand flew from his hand. Petrificus totalis. He went rigid and fell. The second Death Eater was better, more experienced. His curses came fast and deadly, forcing Tonks to give ground, her shields barely holding. She could feel herself tiring already. This kind of sustained casting drained magic faster than anything else. But she couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. So even for a moment, a spell from Dawlish took down her opponent, and Tonks shot him a grateful look before turning back to the broader battle. The grounds below were chaos. Defenders and attackers mixed together in a confused melee, spells flying in every direction. Creatures fighting and dying, the noise overwhelming. She caught a glimpse of the centaurs in battle, their arrows finding targets with unerring accuracy. Saw a giant fall brought down by concentrated spellfire from multiple defenders. Saw, her heart stopped. There near the main entrance, a knot of fighting that included, yes, there was Remus's familiar form, and beside him, Sirius's dark hair, and between them, Harry Potter, the boy who'd already survived so much. They were surrounded, pressed from all sides, fighting desperately. "No," Tonks breathed, taking an unconscious step toward the edge of the platform as if she could somehow reach them, help them, keep them safe. "Tonks, focus!" Dawlish's shout snapped her back to herself just in time to shield against an incoming curse. He was right. She had to trust that Remus could handle his section, that the other defenders would support him. Her job was here, protecting this approach, not abandoning her post, because fear threatened to overwhelm her. But oh, it was hard. Every fiber of her being wanted to run to Remus, to fight at his side, to be there if, when, he needed her. Instead, she turned back to her duties, her hair flashing between gold and red, love and war, the two forces that drove everything she did. More Death Eaters, more curses, more desperate defense of the platform that commanded such a strategic view of the battlefield. Tonks lost track of time, of individual spells, of everything except the immediate necessity of survival and victory. Her world narrowed to wand movements and shield charms and the constant assessment of threats. At some point, she realized the sun had fully risen. Golden light streamed across the battlefield, illuminating everything with brutal clarity. She could see bodies now. Both sides had taken casualties, dark-robed figures and defenders alike lying motionless on the ground. The sight made her stomach clench, made her hair flicker blue with grief. But she couldn't afford to dwell on it. The living needed her attention more than the dead. A massive explosion rocked the castle. One of the giants had broken through a barrier, and Tonks felt the vibration through the stone beneath her feet. Hogwarts itself seemed to groan, ancient magic straining against the assault. But the castle held. The walls didn't crumble. The towers didn't fall. "It's holding," the witch beside Tonks gasped, her face streaked with sweat and soot. "The castle's holding." And it was. For all the violence being thrown at it, for all the dark magic and physical force, Hogwarts remained standing. Its own magic, accumulated over centuries, was defending it as much as the people were. The castle was fighting for itself, protecting its inhabitants with every enchantment woven into its foundations. Tonks felt a surge of fierce love for this place, this impossible, magical, stubborn castle that refused to surrender any more than she did. "Keep holding," she whispered to it, to the stones and staircases and ancient walls. "Just a little longer." The battle raged on, minutes or hours. Tonks couldn't tell anymore. Her magic was running low, her movements slower, every spell requiring more effort than the last. Around her, the other defenders were in similar states, exhausted but refusing to quit, drawing on reserves of strength they hadn't known they possessed. And then, suddenly, unexpectedly, the tide shifted. A massive burst of magic from the castle's interior, a flash of light so bright it momentarily blinded everyone on the battlefield. When Tonks's vision cleared, she saw Voldemort staggering, his forces in disarray, and a figure standing at the castle entrance with his wand raised high. Harry Potter. Somehow, impossibly, the boy had done something that had struck at Voldemort himself. The Death Eaters faltered, seeing their leader threatened. The defenders rallied, pushing forward with renewed energy. And Tonks, standing on the astronomy tower with her wand raised and her hair blazing gold, felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel all night. Hope. "Press the attack." McGonagall's voice rang out across the battlefield. "Drive them back." Tonks threw herself into the renewed assault, her exhaustion forgotten in the sudden possibility of victory. Spells flew faster, shields held stronger, and gradually, impossibly, the Death Eaters began to retreat. First in small groups, then in larger numbers. The dark-robed figures were falling back, apparating away, abandoning the battlefield. The giants fled. The Dementors drifted off toward the forest. And Voldemort himself, wounded and furious, and finally understanding that this battle was lost, disappeared with a crack of displaced air that echoed across the grounds. They were leaving. The attack was over. For a moment, the battlefield was silent. Everyone too shocked to react, too exhausted to celebrate. Then a cheer went up, ragged and hoarse, spreading across the grounds as defenders realized they'd survived. They'd won. They'd driven back the darkness. Tonks sagged against the battlement, her legs suddenly weak, her wand hand shaking. They'd done it. Somehow, against all odds, they'd defended Hogwarts. "Remus," she gasped. And then she was moving, running for the stairs, taking them two at a time in her haste to reach the grounds, to find him, to confirm that he'd survived as well. The entrance hall was crowded with people, wounded being tended fighters, embracing professors, organizing the aftermath. Tonks pushed through them, all her eyes scanning, desperately for familiar features, for brown hair and kind eyes. And there, standing near the doors, his robes torn and bloodied, but his face whole and alive and dear, was Remus Lupin. He saw her at the same moment, and his expression transformed from exhaustion to joy. They met in the middle, crashing together with enough force to hurt, and Tonks didn't care because he was alive. He was whole. He was here. His arms came around her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she held him with equal desperation, her face pressed against his shoulder, her hair cycling through every color she knew in rapid succession. "We did it," Remus whispered against her hair. "We won. We're alive. We're alive," Tonks repeated, the words miraculous. "We're going home to Teddy together," Remus said, pulling back just enough to kiss her, deep and urgent and full of relief and love and the sweet knowledge of survival. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tonks looked around at the great hall, at the defenders celebrating and mourning in equal measure at the castle, still standing strong at the morning light, streaming through the windows like a promise. She pulled out the letter she'd written to Teddy, looking at it one more time. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she cast an incendiary charm. The parchment caught fire, burning quickly and completely, the ashes drifting away on a breeze that shouldn't have existed indoors. "What was that?" Remus asked. "A letter I won't need to send, Tonks," said her hair settling into brilliant, joyous pink. "Because I'm going to tell him everything myself outside." The sun continued its rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The battle was over. The world had been defended, and Nymphadora Tonks, Auror, and Metamorphmagus, and mother and wife stood in Hogwarts, surrounded by those she loved, looking toward a future she'd fought to protect. "We'll make the world better for you," she whispered, one final time, thinking of Teddy, waiting at home. "I promise." And this time, she knew she'd live to keep that promise. The war wasn't over. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead. But today, in this moment, they had won. Light had held against darkness. Love had proven stronger than hate, and Hogwarts, ancient and magical and impossibly dear, still stood proud against the dawn. Tonks smiled, leaned into Remus's embrace, and let herself feel the full weight of gratitude and relief and hope they had survived. They were together, and somewhere in the world, a turquoise-haired baby slept peacefully safe in the knowledge that his parents were coming home